Leadership funding for Battlefront, Connecticut during World War II is made possible by the American Legion, Department of Connecticut, whose mission is to preserve the memories and incidents of our associations in the Great Wars. With additional support provided by Lincoln Financial Group and Genesis Elder Care.
My dear Governor, a convoy which included units of the 43rd Division, the 169th Infantry Regiment, less Cannon Company, the 192nd Field Artillery Battalion, the 118th Medical Battalion, and the 188th Quartermaster Battalion of the Connecticut National Guard, has safely reached an overseas destination. I am sure the units will give a good account of themselves in carrying out their assigned missions. Faithfully yours, George Marshall, Chief of Staff, November 16, 1942.
Some 210,000 men from Connecticut answered America's call to arms between 1941 and 1945. They fought battles from one side of the earth to the other to defeat Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. The cost of victory stood at some 4,500 Connecticut men who perished in combat. Another 1,000 died of disease or were killed in training accidents. Private First Class Joseph Augustin of Middletown distilled the war experience for all Connecticut soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines when he returned from action in Europe. The combat days are the bad days, he said. You have to be there to know what I mean. The United States professed neutrality amid escalating political and military crises through Asia and Europe in the 2 decades following the end of the First World War. But it became clear as early as December 1937 that it would be difficult to stand off from hostilities. Britain, France, and the Low Countries meanwhile struggled with the armed menace presented by Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. Germany, Japan, and Italy under Mussolini vowed to help each other if global war erupted. German threats turned to action on September 1, 1939, when Nazi troops invaded Poland and ignited the Second World War. Soon, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France all fell under the German onslaught. The Nazis then laid siege to England through constant bombings. The war in Europe seemed remote to Connecticut, even though orders from England and America's military buildup energized the state's economy. Connecticut's young men and women worked side by side in large numbers. Many socialized after work.
My 2 brothers took me up to Danbury to apply for a job at the Mallory Hat Company, where I met Eddie Mink. I worked there, and we didn't go out really for a year and a half.
The industrial city of Waterbury produced brass artillery shells and bullet casings in huge amounts. But even in the heartland of the armaments industry, war stood far removed from daily life, particularly for the city's young men. They formed clubs and fielded teams within leagues organized around neighborhoods. In 1938, the Lamberti brothers, Frank and Joe, formed a new club with their friends from the Scoville Street area near the south end of Waterbury. They called it the Warriors.
A bunch of kids from around that Scoville Street there, we used to go out and play ball there, and any empty lot there, you know. You get a ball, either a football or if you were lucky enough, or a softball there, and you played an empty lot there. And eventually, as I said, we used to go over to the boys' club and then play our games there too. Then all of a sudden, well, let's start a little club over there. That's what we did.
At Wesleyan and other colleges in Connecticut, intellectual debate focused on global war and the prospects for American intervention. Debate alone, however, did not suit Wesleyan student Carl Carlson. Canada and Germany were at war, he reckoned. He then drove to Montreal with a classmate to enlist in the Canadian Air Force. Everett Rosine of West Hartford, meanwhile, tired quickly of civilian life after leaving the Army before the war. He re-enlisted. The Army shipped Rosine to the Philippines.
Philippines was not prepared for the war. We only had one American infantry regiment out there. And most of the troops in the Philippines were special troops that like managed warehouses and finance clerks and things of that nature. They weren't combat troops.
The hard edge of segregation persisted, despite the patriotic impulse to unite against Japan and Germany. Connecticut Governor Robert Hurley ordered draft boards to stop discriminating against African American men who were automatically placed on deferred lists without cause. The wounds still went deep.
Germany, Italy, and Japan had to be stopped. But I felt that as a African-American black man who had never enjoyed the full fruits of living, I should not have to go in and fight and give the last full manager. And that case went up to Selective Service headquarters to General Hershey. But General Hershey ruled that in that I was not a theology student, was not studying to be a minister, rather studying to be a professor or a psychologist. Therefore, I would either have to go into the Army, I'll go to Danbury, I'll go to Federal Penitentiary.
Other state African Americans sought to enlist in specific units, such as the Tuskegee Institute's Air Wing in Alabama.
When I was about 5 or 6, Dad and I were walking down Worcester Street, and I heard a loud noise, and I grabbed his hand, and it frightened me. I asked, "What is that?" And he pointed to an object in the sky, said, "That's an airplane." At that moment, I wanted to fly.
FDR moved Connecticut men closer to harm's way in February 1941, when he federalized the 8,000 soldiers of the National Guard. He sent them a month later to a training base called Camp Blanding in Florida near Jacksonville. The War Department assigned the group to the 43rd Division.
We were there with another division, the 31st Division from the southern states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, I think it was. And there were, as you know, most of the people in the 43rd Division were Yankees from New England. And when we got down to Camp Blanding, there were quite a few fights later on in some of the bar rooms around Camp Blanding in Stark, Florida, because we just didn't think the same.
In the fall of 1941, diplomats from the United States and Japan sparred over the Asian nation's intentions. Meanwhile, the flagship of the Pacific Fleet, the USS California, entered Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. A career Navy warrant officer from Thomaston, Connecticut, Thomas J. Reeves, served on the ship as a chief radio man. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japan launched 360 carrier-based aircraft and attacked the Pacific Fleet and military installations at Pearl Harbor. One bomb slammed into the deck of the USS California and bored into an ammunition storage area before exploding. Reeves found ammunition in the wreckage and fed the anti-aircraft battery until killed by smoke and fire. The attack on Pearl Harbor killed 26 servicemen from Connecticut, including 4 sailors from Bridgeport aboard the battleship Arizona when it went down. Fighter pilot Gordon Sterling of West Hartford destroyed a Japanese plane before he was shot down and killed in the attack.
I was a dumb kid just like everybody else in the service. Pearl Harbor meant nothing to any of us. We didn't even know what it was. We thought the world was going to come to an end, and of course we were going to be shipped out immediately somewhere. We didn't know where.
I was returning to the Yukon campus on a Sunday afternoon. Stopped to see my roommate and leave off some clothing that his mother had given me to deliver. He greeted me at the door and said the Japanese have just attacked Pearl Harbor. Well, it was such a shock, I don't think we could understand the full impact of what that meant.
The U.S. declared war on Japan the next day. Germany and Italy then issued declarations against the U.S., which responded in kind. American forces, including Everett Rosine, surrendered to Japanese infantry on April 9, 1942, after 4 months of combat on Bataan in the Philippines. Already weakened by months on short rations, the American prisoners embarked on a forced 70-mile march in blistering heat. They walked without food, water, or medicine. Thousands perished.
Some of the men that had high fevers from malaria, they would have convulsions and they'd just fall, and the Japanese would kill them, shoot them. And one time I saw a Japanese soldier, some tanks were coming across, and one man was stumbling along like he was going to fall, and he hit him with his rifle butt, and he shoved him right out in front of the tanks. And 3 or 4 tanks went over this man. And all it was, the uniform looked like it was pressed into the dirt after they'd passed. I'll never forget that.
Corregidor, the island citadel of American forces in the Philippines, fell next. 70,000 soldiers surrendered unconditionally to Japanese forces. Off the coast of New Guinea, in a little-known area of the Pacific called the Coral Sea, a U.S. carrier task force turned aside a sizable Japanese fleet. Still, America and Connecticut's citizen soldiers and sailors faced the long grind of war en route to Tokyo and Berlin. The Pearl Harbor attack and the loss of the Army garrison at Corregidor sent morale on the home front tumbling. But Connecticut quickly provided 2 heroes in the early months of hostilities to see the state through the rough early days of war. Thomas J. Reeves received posthumously the Medal of Honor for feeding ammunition to the anti-aircraft battery on the California during the Pearl Harbor attack. Lieutenant Harold Watson of West Hartford flew one of 16 bombers led by James Doolittle that surprised Tokyo on April 18, 1942.
Good morning, Australia. Good afternoon, Hawaii. Good evening, America. Whoever you are, wherever you are, this is Connecticut calling.
A shortwave radio broadcast from the Bushnell Memorial in May transmitted descriptions of Connecticut life to the troops encamped in Australia and elsewhere.
It's fitting that you should hear from the first citizen of the Nutmeg State, the handsome wearer of the gubernatorial toga, a Bridgeport boy who made good in the big city. I present His Excellency, Governor Robert A. Hurley.
To every Connecticut man in the service, your state salutes you. It is spring now, here at home, and you know what that means. The fields are green, laurel and dogwood are in bloom along the highways and the country roads. New leaves form a green arch over city and village streets. These things you have seen and known and loved, but they aren't quite the same this year. And just as we have a deep and abiding faith in you, we want you to be sure that whatever our duty is, it will be done. We want you to know what we are working for, working to...
At home, though, winning the war meant often going without things such as gasoline, sugar, meat, and coal. Anti-aircraft guns around key defense plants in Hartford and other cities provided reminders of the threat from German bombers. Rumors of U-boats in the Connecticut River in Long Island Sound kept river and shoreline communities on edge. But it was the long reach of the draft across the state that brought home the full nature of the sacrifice ahead. Conscription's odd twists gave factory workers the chance to use in combat what they had built on the production line back home.
My friend said, "You came from New London, why don't you put in for subservice?" I said, "I don't know. I'd been working on those things for a while, and I didn't really think it was the branch of service I wanted to go into." But then I thought about it. I said, well, New London, I had to go to sub school up at the base. And then from that, I went to Battery and Gyro School. That was up at the base. So I said, well, I'll give it a shot. So I put in for submarines.
Once inseparable brothers left for military training in different branches of the service.
My brother was stationed at Camp Catlin, which is in Hawaii. And the day I arrived, I was stationed at a Camp Catlin, only there was a fence in between where he was, the barracks he was in, and the tent that I was sleeping in. So I went under the fence to see my brother, and I saw him, and I came back through the same way, and I got caught by a guard. So he brought me up against an officer. And he says, "Tomorrow morning you come up for office hours." And then I turned and said, "Yes, sir." I turned around. He says, "No, don't. Come back. You saw your brother?" "Yes." He said, "Let's forget it."
Richie and I, we had little differences. He was younger than I was by a couple of years, 2.5 years. But we got along. We went to different high schools. But he had his friends and I had mine. And we got to the point where we were old enough to realize we weren't kids anymore, and the fighting had to cease, and it did.
The war meant separation for young couples.
When you're going together and everything, we had to save money. We were both young. We wanted to get married, but we knew we had to work at it. And we didn't want to do that when he went in the service. He said we shouldn't, and I said the same thing. So we did not get married then. And we were not formally engaged, but he went into the service, and we wrote every day, letters back and forth, and he came home on a couple furloughs.
Members of the Warriors Athletic Club of Waterbury began leaving for the service even before Pearl Harbor. Frank Lamberti joined the Marines early in 1941. His brother Joe and most other members of the club were drafted. Basic training broadened the social experience of many Connecticut servicemen who were away from their home state for the first time. All learned the rigors and routine of military life within the unique environment of GI culture.
Sugar Report means a letter from the girlfriend. Swanks are a soldier's best clothing. A short circuit between ears means a mental lapse. Blind flying is a date with a girl you've never met. Scandal sheet is known as the payroll in this circuit. Slipping the clutch is talking or criticizing too much. And up the pole is recognized as on the wagon. Charles McCarthy, The Bristol Press, March 23, 1942.
The war did not wait for green troops to mature. On June 4, 1942, the U.S. Navy repulsed Japanese naval and air forces on Midway Island. B-17 bombers launched a devastating counterattack and drove the Japanese westward. They would never gain the initiative again in the war. In November 1942, American troops joined the war against Nazi Germany. Infantry landed in North Africa to fight Axis forces. "We're on our way," President Roosevelt said. Also that month, small formations of B-17s flying from bases in England began to bomb military targets in France, Belgium, and Germany.
We used to bomb with a handful of airplanes, 15 airplanes. We went to Paris one day, 6 airplanes. We went to Germany, 15 airplanes, no fighter escorts.
The bombing raids expended men and machinery without mercy. Men in 4-engine planes had 25 missions to survive until grounded. Jim Varinas of New Haven served as co-pilot on the Memphis Belle in the early bombing campaigns. The War Department ordered Varinas and the Memphis Belle crew home after their 25th mission to promote bond drives and other elements of the home front. They toured the country until they grew weary of the constant attention. The 43rd Division and its contingent of Connecticut soldiers received orders in October to go to Guadalcanal. As the division sailed westward, U.S. Marines and Army units were engaged in fierce battles with Japanese naval and infantry forces for control of the island. When the 43rd got there, Guadalcanal was in American hands.
We landed in Guadalcanal in January, and the fighting there was pretty well over. Most of the so-called combat was patrolling, and most of the Japs we saw were dead, and had been dead for a long time.
The 43rd Division moved out of the Solomon Islands in the spring of 1943. The next target, Rendova Island and Munda, where the Japanese had built an airstrip. The Americans learned quickly how the Japanese infantry fought, at night and without regard to their own lives.
They were vicious fighters. We thought they were crazy the way they'd charge, and we killed hundreds and hundreds of them, but it didn't seem to make any difference to them. And after a while, you got to the point where you didn't feel that you were shooting or killing a human.
The war in Europe had been fought largely in the air until 1943. Allied forces invaded Sicily in July and at Salerno 2 months later.
On the first 9 days in Salerno, I didn't sleep. Finally, on the 9th day, my battery commander ordered me to lie down and get some sleep. And one of the officers that was nearby commented, "He's afraid he's going to miss something."
The hills and grottos of San Pietro turned into a killing ground for both sides until American forces broke through. The German army, however, had dug in elsewhere and would be difficult to dislodge. Larger and larger formations of Allied bombers confronted ferocious German fighters in sheets of flak over Nazi-occupied territory. In Danbury, Ellen Bartram and the Mink family received the news they had feared most. Edward Mink's B-26 had been shot down in Europe, with the crew reported missing and presumed lost.
The doorbell rang, and this man said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Mink." And then when I went in the hall, it was in the hall, my dad was holding this telegram. And I glanced and I saw killed instead of missing. So it was traumatic. And then my mother came in, and of course we all cried.
Everybody was devastated, both families, absolutely devastated. It was just, it's indescribable what everybody was going through. I remember how awful it was for everybody. And how I just didn't believe it. I never believed it.
Carl Carlson, the Wesleyan student who joined the Canadian Air Force, was killed in the skies above Europe too. Wesleyan English professor Fred Millett circulated news of Carlson's death among classmates scattered around the world.
Dear Fred, Carlson's death came as quite a surprise to me. I thought he could conquer anything that fate threw his way. Death seemed an untimely and insufficient answer to the questions he was asking of life. There is perhaps a basic reason for his death. I doubt whether he ever learned to fly. He expected to leap, full sprung into blinding battle, depending on the steel of his spirit and the sheer force of his will to shatter his opponents. His restless spirit never allowed him to learn. It was against his nature. He expected to fly as the artist in him would draw or write, and failing to make the necessary compromise, he finally lost his life. His loss, I think, we should regret above many. He was a strong salt in a weakly savored world. Talcott Williams, The Philippines, June 12, 1945.
Fred Millett, according to a colleague, was born in the year of Melville's death in a Massachusetts town called Whitman. Millett composed a newsletter and distributed it to his students overseas and in camps for conscientious objectors. Letters, he remarked, could keep the sane intact during the insanity of war.
The Second World War occasioned the most spectacular renaissance of letter writing in history. There is abundant evidence that one of the activities most conducive to the preservation of sanity and morale was the writing and receiving of letters. In all probability, the invention of V-mail saved far more minds than the most amazing of the new drugs restored bodies. Professor Fred B. Millett, Wesleyan University.
As the ground campaign in Italy accelerated, military nurses saw the horrendous toll of war among the wounded in field evacuation hospitals.
The very first amputee I had, absolutely no arms or legs. And he was in a ward with, there were 30 in the ward. And all of the fellows were just watching me to see how I was going to handle it. Because that was not easy. I managed. I could see the eyes, you know. What did she do? What did she do? Did she cry? Did she do?
As the hard year of 1943 closed, a palpable weariness with the war settled on the United States. But the fighting through the hedgerows of Europe and the volcanic ash of the Pacific Islands would demand an even greater toll in the months ahead.
In the year 1943 came a certainty. The partisans of life had grown stronger than the mechanized conspiracy of death. The Allies had started to break the Axis. The man of the year did not live to take the bow. He died in Tunis, on Tarawa, at Salerno. On the blood-soaked fields around Kiev, Chogcha, Kharkov, he lost his face, his limbs, and his mind before flamethrowers, in the cockpits of blazing planes, in the insane shadows of the jungle. he had badly wanted to live. When he died, the world had lost one particle of its meaning. But his death added more meaning than it took. It gave the living another chance to abolish the ugly crime of war. The soldier who died was the father of the unborn future. Time magazine, January 3rd, 1944.
Everett Rosine of West Hartford had been in a Japanese prison camp for 2 years as the spring of 1944 blossomed in Connecticut. The survivor of the Bataan Death March weighed only 70 pounds, and he witnessed unimaginable horrors every day.
When we first got captured, everybody got horrible diseases from starvation starvation diseases. The first thing you notice, you can't see when you starve for weeks and months at a time. Your eyes start to affect you. You're blinking a lot, and it feels like someone throws some dirt in your eyes. And then all of a sudden you start to swell up. Your legs swell up like that, and your belly sticks out, and you get some of the men get when they lay down, they swell up behind the glands of their ears, and they puff up, and they don't live very long after that. And so we're losing men every day.
In Connecticut, only 6,000 men 26 and under remained in the state in 1944. The rest had gone off to war. The insatiable appetite for combatants claimed even middle-aged men who had been exempt from the draft because they were fathers before Pearl Harbor.
I remember as that time came along, we would say in the house, is this the month that I'm going to go? And if I got past that one, is next month going to be the month? And it finally came to the time when February of 44, I was drafted.
Like a growing list of people in Connecticut, the Mink and Bartram families in Danbury mourned the death of a loved one. Edward Mink, an airman, was thought to have been killed in Italy the previous September. Then a letter arrived at the tiny post office in Bethel.
December 25th. My dearest sweets, well, today is Christmas, and I hope you and the family had a nice one, because I did, under these circumstances. I went to midnight mass last night, and tonight I'm going to a Christmas show. Well, dear, I'll write later. All my love to you and the family. Your loved one, Eddie Joe. Edward Mink, prisoner of war, Germany.
The girl next door brought the card home to my family, and when I got down there, the police chief told me to get home because Eddie was alive. And I just looked at him. I don't even remember how I got home.
Pilot said, get out, go ahead. So it was my job, being a radio man. I was sitting in a parachute that I sat on. The guy in the top turret, he's got a chest chute, which he doesn't have on. It's my job to put that chest chute on this guy when he comes out of the top turret, open the escape hatch, and tell him to go out. Well, I got him all set, and I says, go out. He says, no, you go first. I didn't waste any time. I went out, and I only got out about seems like only a minute or two when I hit the ground. My plane was no farther away than 200, 300 yards from me, so the poor guy didn't get a chance to get out. So I was the only one out of that plane that day.
Hundreds of thousands of American troops and their equipment poured into England throughout 1943 and 1944. The long-awaited invasion of France was scheduled for late spring 1944. For 3 days in early June 1944, battle-ready Allied troops awaited invasion orders. The Supreme Commander for Allied Forces, General Dwight Eisenhower, ordered Operation Overlord, the invasion of France, to commence on June 6, 1944.
The President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, in this poignant hour,
I ask you to join with me in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard, for the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tried by night and by day, without rest, until the victory is won. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war.
And they dropped the gate. And when I went down, you had to go off the low side. And so I had these 4 25-pound shells besides all my pack and everything else on it. When I went off on the low side, I went down and I happened to hit a big shell crater in the water, under the water. And I had to dispose of that or I would have drowned.
The Allied drive for Paris stalled at St. Lo, where German troops had dug in. The brutal fighting that followed resulted in heavy Allied casualties. James Kanata of Waterbury, one of the original members of the Warriors Athletic Club, was killed in the fighting. It took the largest bombing raid of the war up to that time to end the battle. The D-Day landings in Normandy overshadowed significant gains in the Pacific Campaign. U.S. Marines invaded Saipan and cleared it of Japanese defenders by the middle of July 1944, after weeks of hard fighting against troops that refused to surrender. American forces then targeted the small but vital island of Iwo Jima, whose airfield would put American planes in reach of Japan. Under the Pacific, submarines kept the pressure on Japanese shipping.
We got into this transport, and they said that, I checked this with the captain the last time I talked to him, and I said they told us there was about 5,000 Japanese killed in that fracas. He says that's about right. And he said that other boats that relieved that area from us, they couldn't raise the scope without hitting a Japanese body.
In Italy, American troops continued to drive northward, clearing town after town of Nazi forces. But in the mountains, what troops called the tough old gut of Italy became that much tougher.
By the time we got up into the hillside, the infantry company was pretty well spread out across the hillside. And I was alone with one infantryman and the guy carrying my radio. And we were approached by one German that we shot. And then shortly after that, I decided to bust up the radio so that they couldn't capture it. And some Germans closed in on us, shouting, "Hands up, hands up." And I put my hands up.
American success in the drive toward Berlin and Tokyo sparked optimism that the war would be over by Christmas 1944, at least in Europe. A German offensive launched less than 2 weeks before Christmas changed that. German tanks and infantry drove through thinly spread Allied positions near the Ardennes. They surrounded the Belgian town of Bastogne and told the garrison there to surrender. No, the Americans answered.
The whole Battle of the Bulge was miserable. The first night was a dark night, and after we had met the first attack, they told us to pick positions for the night. So Ernest Hackey of Worcester and me spotted a lone barn and picked it to spend the night. It was bitterly cold and no lights whatsoever were allowed. We got into the barn all right and felt around for a soft place to lie down. About in the middle of the barn floor, we found what seemed to be some sacks of meal or stock feed, so we spread out blankets and crawled on there to sleep. When daylight came and we woke up, we were amazed to find that our soft spot was not a pile of feed sacks. It was 2 dead horses. Private First Class Lewis Odell, 199th Infantry, New Haven.
Thickening clouds kept Allied planes grounded for most of the first 10 days of the battle. But when the weather cleared, American pilots battered German positions. The battle ended in January. Vincent Iannacone, another original warrior from Waterbury, was one of thousands of American soldiers killed in action during the Bulge. In the Pacific, Nicholas Farrow learned of his brother's fate.
He volunteered to go on this last mission so that he'd be eligible to come home for Christmas. And he told my mother, "I'll see you at Christmas." And she never liked that song, "I'll Be Home for Christmas," I can tell you that. So they went out, they dropped their bombs over the Bleckenheimer oil fields in Germany, and they were headed back to their base in Italy. And when they did, they ran into the squadron leader. 2 planes came down, 2 B-17s. There were some survivors, but he wasn't one of them. I just prayed, I shouldn't say this, I suppose. I was hoping God would take me and send him home.
U.S. naval and air forces launched an air and sea invasion of Corregidor in February 1945. American troops routed Japanese infantry from their positions around Manila Bay and then moved to wipe out any remaining resistance in the Philippines. On February 19, 1945, U.S. Marines launched a seaborne assault of Iwo Jima. After securing the beachhead, infantry forces moved quickly toward the commanding heights of Mount Suribachi.
We hadn't really taken much of the island when the flag was raised, but the reason why it was so important was the highest point. And whoever has the highest point is a great advantage in any battle. So we took Mount Suribachi because the Japanese were firing from the mountain down on us on the beach. They could see every move we made, and we couldn't see them because they were in caves up in the mountain.
Over the next 5 weeks, Marines and Japanese troops battled for every yard of ground in a costly test of strength that occurred largely at night.
One of them jumped out with his hands up, but then he pointed down to the trench. There was another Jap down there, and so he got up. But he ran toward us with a bayonet, a small bayonet that they had. So they killed him. We had to kill him.
My favorite weapon, no weapon is favorite, my favorite weapon was a hand grenade. If you knew a general idea area that you thought there were Japanese, because of sounds you heard, or you might have momentarily saw a movement there, you throw a hand grenade, and that has about a 40-foot, if I remember correctly, spread of shrapnel.
Many Connecticut servicemen fighting in Italy in 1944 and 1945 found themselves in the ironic circumstance of helping to free their relatives from Nazi domination. Some servicemen even visited relatives after specific areas of the country were declared secure.
Everybody just broke out crying. So they said, all right, now be quiet, be quiet. So they go, Ma, my grandmother, who was 94, is up on the second floor, and she's coming down the stairs, and she says, you think that you're fooling me? She says, I can recognize my grandson anytime.
Northern Italy remained in Nazi hands into 1945. German ski troops had lodged themselves deep within a mountain range. Military planners formed the 10th Mountain Division to fight on the spine of Japan, but decided to dispatch the unit to northern Italy. After almost 3 months of fighting, the division secured the mountain passes, but with many casualties.
A shell came in and landed to the left of us. I had fallen to the ground with my head by his feet, and he fell just the opposite. His feet were at my head. And I remember a medic shaking me, wanted to know if I was wounded, or probably thought I was dead, and shook me and said, help me with this fellow right here. And I picked up his feet, and he picked up the head, and the left side of his head was just shorn right off.
American forces raced toward Germany in early spring, overcoming determined Nazi opposition.
Accept the results of this conference as the beginnings of a permanent structure of peace.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt died in April 1945. Vice President Harry Truman succeeded him. As the Allies tightened their grip, German fighters refused to capitulate.
We were going into the town of Rheinberg, and the Germans were all along the road, and they knocked off 15 of us, set them on fire, killed everybody. And I was lucky, I made it.
American armored and infantry columns freed thousands of prisoners of war en route to Berlin. They also exposed Nazi Germany's vast network of concentration and slave labor camps.
When we got to Buchenwald, we were very upset seeing all these bodies that were burnt and the ovens that they were placed in, and also piled up on these boxes of the beds of the trucks. And it was really very sad seeing that happen. And I know that people today don't believe that ever happened, but it did.
German resistance crumbled in Berlin by the middle of spring 1945. On May 9, 1945, President Harry Truman declared victory in Europe. The ferocity of the defense of Iwo Jima convinced naval officials that an invasion of the Japanese mainland would take 2 years and 1 million lives to complete. The invasion of Okinawa did nothing to change that view. Facing sustained attacks from kamikaze aircraft and stubborn defense in caves and other areas, American forces took almost 3 months to clear the island of resistance. Meanwhile, troops from Europe began arriving in the Pacific area to prepare for the invasion of mainland Japan. On July 16, 1945, at Alamogordo, New Mexico, the U.S. successfully tested its secret weapon, the atom bomb. A B-29 dropped the weapon on Hiroshima, Japan 3 weeks later on August 6th. Japan refused to surrender. A second atomic bomb leveled Nagasaki 3 days after the first on Hiroshima. The Japanese gave up arms after that and officially surrendered aboard the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. The Second World War was over.
I can't tell you how happy we were because, you know, everybody felt, hey, the law of averages is going to catch up with you. You go to Japan, you're dead. Because of our experience, they put the more experienced fighters up front, and so we figured, hey, that's it. So we were ecstatic.
Everett Rosine spent almost the entire war in a prison camp. He was finally a free man.
They'd knock you down with their rifle butt, and they'd kick you, and they'd beat me on the head with a 2x4 and cut my scalp open, and it was constant. It was constant. It seems though no matter what we did, we would never do anything right. And sometimes, if you were working, they'd come along with a rifle butt and they'd hit you across the back and knock you down. And then a bunch of them would kick you in all places. And that's the way it went almost every day. So you got so used to this being beaten all the time that you just ignored it. And so to stop that and say that you're free to go, you can leave and go out of the camp without somebody with a rifle and a bayonet on your tail end every minute. It's just not. You can't have the words to describe the feeling. Be free.
Troops started to return to Connecticut almost immediately, but for anxious wives, the wait seemed too long.
When a G.I. Joe is 37 and a half years old, has faithfully served his country for a year and 8 months, when he has a wife and 2 half-grown children, not babies, his own home and a good job to come back to, why can't he come home? It's too late now to do anything about Christmas. I couldn't believe we again would be separate this Christmas in peacetime. But it looks that way now, and the children are heartbroken. Not to mention a certain G.I., who undoubtedly will have to spend another Christmas 1,000 miles from home. Respectfully yours, Ruth R. Lehelt, December 18th, 1945.
The end of the war closed a significant part of the lives of many Connecticut veterans. Connie Napier received his wings and served in the last class of the Tuskegee Airmen in 1946. Shirley Fox was one of 3,000 Connecticut women to serve in the military during the war. She remained a nurse in civilian life. After the war, Memphis Belle co-pilot Jim Varinas later worked with pilot Robert Morgan in the furniture business. The Warriors Athletic Club of Waterbury waited for the return of their beloved friend Frank Lamberti from Japan, where he served in the occupation forces. He never made it back to the neighborhood. Lamberti's plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean en route to the United States. His body was never recovered. The Warriors continued to meet, but the days of athletic competition were over. They would hold reunions for decades. Edward Mink, the airman shot down over Italy and thought to be killed in action, and Ellen Bartram got married after the war. Everett Rosine spent the rest of his career in the U.S. Army. The remains of U.S. servicemen killed in the Pacific and European theaters of action began returning home for burial in 1947. Most of the 2,500 Connecticut servicemen killed in action were brought back to their home state. The full measure of the wartime experience of Connecticut veterans emerged only after years of personal contemplation about what had happened between 1941 and 1945.
Well, to think that all you saw, all that death and everything, and things you did, it's a question. You just wonder why you did them after, but you knew why you did it when you were there.
There were times I don't think it really happened to me, that I wasn't really in a war, and I didn't go through the experiences which I did go through, because it's so long ago. It seems surrealistic in a way. But it's there and it's history.
Anthony Santoro, one of the original warriors from Waterbury, realized that he and an earlier generation of American veterans were forever connected by two seemingly distant events.
When I was going to grammar school, I was about 8, 9 years old. I can still remember in grammar school the Civil War veteran coming to the class and talking to the kids. And this is about 60 some odd years after the Civil War, right? I'm going to schools now, and I'm talking to kids 65 years after World War II. Talking about history repeating itself. You know, there's history repeating itself. I hope to God the kids I was talking to won't be in class addressing their classes.
I shall sing an Irish song, Walter, for the brother of my good friend, Morton Downey. Morton's brother is Corporal Ed Downey of Wallingford, Connecticut. Across the ocean wild and wide, to where your heart has ever been, since first you were my bonny bride. The roses all have left your cheek. I've watched them fade away and die. Your voice is sad when you speak, and tears bedim your loving eyes.
Which count am I on? You got me on two different counts.
I'm going to go 3, 2. I'm not going to say 1.
Okay.
You go when you're ready.
Okay.
Ready, and 3.
Yeah, raise that camera.
Doing what it wants. 3, 2.
Thank you and good evening. Over the course of the next hour, we'll be discussing one of the more daunting fiscal challenges facing state and local governments, the mounting bill to cover the promised pension plans and health insurance benefits for teachers, state workers, and municipal employees. Our intent is to hear both sides of the debate and to give you, those in the studio audience, and the CPTV WNPR viewers and listeners an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. Members of our expert panel are Denise Napier, Connecticut State Treasurer,